Welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to dive into some fascinating source material. This time, we're heading to West Papua.
The easternmost part of Indonesia.
Yeah, and I have to say, the stuff you dug up on this region is really interesting.
Yeah.
Most people don't know much about West Papua at all. It's got a really rich history. To get it, we kind of have to go past the headlines.
Totally. We're talking centuries of this place being isolated, right? So totally unique cultures and social structures evolved there.
Right.
Then during the New Order era in Indonesia, under Suharto, it was called Irian Jaya. That was the name the government gave it.
You know, that name change alone, it's like a big clue about the power dynamics going on there. For a lot of its modern history, West Papua's story has been told by, outsiders, not by the Papuans.
So getting their perspective is crucial. One thing that jumped out at me was this. The Papuan people are Melanesian. That makes them different from most Indonesians who are Austronesian.
Huge difference. We're talking about, totally different origins, cultures, even different ways of life. Imagine, in your family, your uncle, your mom's brother is more important than your dad.
Whoa, really? That's wild.
Right. He'd be in charge of, your marriage, your initiation rituals, everything. This system of kinship, their unique art, these elaborate men's houses called karawari, and the intricate symbols on everything, their canoes, their houses, all that shows how deep and complex Papuan culture is.
It's amazing how these cultures could just develop on their own for so long. It really makes you wonder how that isolation ended and how it affected them.
Well, that's where the history gets important. Bringing West Papua into Indonesia was a messy process. Lots of conflict, lots of arguments about it.
And that's where the darker side of the story comes out, right?
Yeah.
All the human rights abuses, the fight for independence.
Unfortunately, yes. That source, Human Rights in West Papua 2021, it really lays out the problems Papuans are facing.
From what I read, Suharto falling in '98 seemed like a major turning point. It's like this dam broke, and all these voices that were silenced, they could finally be heard.
Yeah, that was big. Suharto's regime was all about squashing any opposition. When he was gone, tons of reforms happened all over Indonesia. They called it reformasi. It finally gave regions like East Timor, ACE, and Papua a chance to speak up.
And that led to more separatist movements, right?
Right.
Groups like the PDP, they wanted self-determination for Papua.
Exactly. These movements got stronger because Papuans wanted control over their lives, their land, their future. And we got to understand, these calls for independence, they didn't come out of nowhere. There were decades of, being treated as less important, having their culture suppressed, human rights abuses, all that was fueling it.
So what did the Indonesian government do about this unrest?
They came up with special autonomy in 2001.
Special autonomy. Sounds like they were trying, at least on paper, to deal with some of those concerns. Did it actually work?
Well, that's where things get tricky. The goals were good on the surface. It was supposed to give Papua more political power, more control over its own resources, plus more money for development and recognition for Papuan culture and identity.
Sounds promising. But I bet there's a but coming.
You bet. The reality on the ground, it's a whole different story.
What went wrong?
Well, a lot of things. Corruption, for one. All that extra money for development, it often ended up in the pockets of corrupt officials, not helping the communities it was meant for.
That's awful. So even with good intentions, the system was messed up.
Yeah. And there was another big problem. The Indonesian military was still there.
Ah, right. Hard to talk about real autonomy with soldiers around enforcing the central government's control.
You got it. That military presence, plus, nobody being held accountable, created a climate of fear, basically. Made it hard for special autonomy to actually work.
It seems like a classic case of looks good on paper, but... But beyond the failures of special autonomy, there's this thing that really struck me. The resource curse.
Ah, yeah. It keeps happening in places that have lots of natural resources, and West Papua is no different. It's loaded with minerals like nickel and copper, but instead of helping the people there, this wealth has often caused conflict and displacement.
You're saying that these resources actually made things worse for Papuans?
In a lot of ways, yeah. Multinational corporations came in to extract those resources, often with government support, and that meant indigenous communities were pushed off their ancestral lands to make way for mines and other projects.
It's like history repeating itself, isn't it? Exploitation and displacement, all for the profit of outsiders.
Yeah.
Do the sources give any specific examples?
Oh yeah. Take the city of Jayapura. Used to be called Hollandia. It's a major city in West Papua now, but its growth came at a huge cost. The sources describe all these cases of Papuan communities forced off their land to make way for development projects. all connected to resource extraction.
It's really sad to think about the impact this has had on their lives, their culture, their connection to the land.
It's a terrible situation, for sure. Shows the complicated challenges facing West Papua today.
We've covered a lot already, but it feels like we're just starting to understand what else is important about this whole situation.
It's important to remember that West Papua isn't just like some political problem to be solved, you know? It's a place with real people living their lives, dealing with these challenges every day. The stuff you found, it touches on that human side. We can't forget that.
That's true. We've been looking at the big picture, but what about the everyday Papuans? Their hopes and fears, how they've managed to stay strong through all this.
Yeah, that's where you see the real effects of all this stuff. It's easy to get lost in, the politics and forget about the human cost.
Right. Reading about displacement and resource extraction, that's one thing. But actually picturing what it's like to be kicked off your land, to see your home destroyed, to feel like your culture is under attack, that's different.
That's why it's so important to listen to Papuans, to their stories, to try and see things from their perspective.
One source talked about this ritual with a special yam, fiel, I think. They harvest it when a certain constellation, Pleiades, shows up in the sky.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how Papuan culture is tied to nature. Their rituals, their beliefs, their identity, it's all rooted in their connection to the land, which makes the whole resource extraction thing even worse.
So it's not just about losing land, it's about losing a part of who they are.
Exactly. The fight for West Papua is way bigger than just political autonomy. It's about survival, about justice for the environment, and about people having the right to decide their own future.
It shows how all these issues are connected, right?
Yeah.
You can't talk about human rights without talking about protecting culture and the environment. It's all part of the same struggle.
Absolutely. And it's a fight happening on all these different levels, not just by Papuans themselves, but by people all over who support them.
So there is hope. People trying to make things better.
For sure. The sources talk about all these activists, artists, teachers, community leaders in West Papua and outside. They're spreading the word, pushing for change, working to build a better future.
What about the Indonesian government? Are they doing anything about these problems?
Well, it's complicated. Some people in the government want reform, but then there are these powerful groups who benefit from things staying the same.
It's all about money, right?
Yeah.
Exploiting West Papua's resources makes a lot of people rich, especially those in power.
Yeah, that's a story as old as time. But it's not unbeatable. More and more attention is being paid to West Papua thanks to activists and organizations. That puts pressure on the government to do something.
Okay, so for people like us, just learning about this, what can we do? It feels overwhelming, to be honest.
I get it can be, but even small things can help. One of the biggest things is just to talk about West Papua, share what you've learned.
So, like, break the silence. Don't let it stay hidden.
Exactly. The more people know, the more pressure there is for change.
Okay, awareness is key. What else?
You can support organizations working in West Papua, groups focused on human rights, protecting the environment, helping communities. They do amazing work, but they need help.
Donate, volunteer, get their message out there.
Yeah, and don't underestimate what you can do just by speaking up. Write to your representatives, tell them to take a stand on West Papua, make those in power accountable.
So showing we're paying attention, that we care, that we won't just accept injustice.
Right. And remembering that this isn't just an Indonesian problem, it's a global one. We all have a responsibility to stand up for human rights and work towards a fairer world.
I feel a sense of responsibility now, not just to learn, but to actually do something.
That's what it's all about. And remember, you're not alone. There are people all over the world fighting for change in West Papua.
This has been really eye-opening. We went from knowing almost nothing to, well, getting a much deeper understanding of how complex it is. The problems, the possible solutions, the role of the international community, all of it.
And remember, this is just the start. There's always more to learn, more stories to hear, more perspectives to consider. But this is a good place to begin.
It is. And it leaves me thinking about a lot of things, a lot to process and a lot to do. But before we finish up, I have one last question. We've talked about the problems, the solutions, what other countries can do.
Yeah.
What about the Papuans themselves? What would you say to them directly, if you could?
Wow, that's a big question. I think what I'd want them to know most is that we stand with them. To the people of West Papua, I'd say, you are so strong, the way you've kept going, the way you hold on to your culture and your land. It's inspiring.
That's beautiful. And I think it gets to the core of everything we've talked about today.
It does. And it reminds us that this isn't just some abstract political thing. This is about real people, their lives, their hopes, their struggles. And we have to stand with them as they fight for justice and the right to decide their own future.
It's like, wow, we've really been on this journey, haven't we? Exploring West Papua with our expert here. And what a trip it's been. We started out curious about this kind of far-off place, and now we're right in the middle of all this. History, culture, politics, human rights, everything.
Yeah. And it's not over, This deep dive, it's just the starting point.
True, true. It's definitely made me want to learn more, do more, be a part of, I don't know, something bigger. But honestly, part of me still feels kind of overwhelmed. Like, what can one person even do about all these huge problems?
I hear you. It's easy to get discouraged when you see how big the issues in West Papua are, but change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with those little things, each person doing something, and it builds up.
So it's not about trying to fix everything myself. It's more like finding my own way to help.
Yeah, exactly. And that can look different for everyone. Educate yourself, talk to your friends and family, share stuff online, support those organizations doing the work in West Papua, or even reach out to your elected officials, tell them to do something about it.
So finding what speaks to me, what I'm passionate about, and using that.
Exactly. And never underestimate what happens when people work together. When everyone raises their voices, it makes a difference, a big one. People in power, they can't ignore that.
I'm starting to feel a little hopeful. Not in a naive way, but knowing that change can happen, people are out there fighting for it, and we can join them.
That's the right attitude. The future of West Papua, it's not set in stone. What happens now with individuals, communities, governments, it's all shaping what that future will be. And when you get involved, learn, take action, you become part of that.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. I feel both small, thinking about how big this all is, but also like I can actually do something about it.
That's exactly what I hoped you'd take away from this. A sense of responsibility, a little bit of hope, and a commitment to keep learning, keep thinking about this.
Thank you so much for taking us on this journey. It's been amazing, and I'll never look at West Papua the same way again.
And to you, listening, don't stop here. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, listen to everyone involved, and keep working towards a better, more peaceful world for everyone.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep diving deep.